This week on the WriterCon podcast.
I think to write every day. I mean, that's the one that I think it seems to me when I talk to writers who have sort of made it to the point where they've completed a novel or they're successfully in classes or they're published, sort of like whatever their standard is for being a successful writer, and they've made those goals. It's because they touch the computer every day. And someone recently said to me, if you touch your project every day, it'll just build up a muscle and becomes a habit. I usually try for about 500 words a day. I tell myself, okay, just get 500 words out. And then sometimes when that starts to feel good, you can push towards 1,000 or 1,500. But even just to tell yourself that every day I'm going to write 500 words.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Renee Gutteridge, best-selling author of over 30 novels and screenplays.
Thank you, Jesse Ulrich, and hello, writers. We're back after a brief hiatus, mostly created by my travel plans, but I'm back in Oklahoma now, and of course, like all good, dedicated WriterCon writers, I wrote my chapter this morning. Renee, how's your script coming along?
Still coming. I've gotten notes, and I'm applying and still writing.
Good.
Should be done by December. December.
Fantastic. Jesse, have you worked on any good audiobooks lately?
Well, I haven't worked on two books recently from a William Bernhardt that people might be familiar with.
He's pretty good, isn't it? I've heard.
This is a surprisingly good poet. So, your book of poetry and your Yuletide Splitsville short story I worked on recently. And the Splitsville's done and the poetry book will be done soon.
Fantastic. Thanks for that completely unforced plug. Today, our guest is Katie Sise. She's the New York Times bestselling author of Open House and We Were Mothers, and she's got a new book out called The Break. We want to talk to her about this new book and her writing process and a lot of other crazy stuff. But first, the news. First news story. There's a new report out that indicates, get ready for this, that self-publishing income now equals another Penguin Random House. This came out of the Frankfurt Book Fair and actually came from a report given by two people at Rabbiton Kobo. And let me just read this quote for you. In each of the markets that we are in as Kobo, self-publishing is the first, second, or third largest publisher in that market for us. Just to put this in a context that people can get their heads around, 1 in 4 books that we sell in English is a self-published title, which means that effectively for us, self-publishing is like having a whole other Penguin Random House sitting out in the market that no one sees, end quote. It's like the dark matter of publishing, which I thought was, I think there's a perception out there that self-publishing is sort of, an isolated thing done by a handful of losers and none of them make any money. And to be fair, not everybody's self-publishing is making any money or finding readers, but clearly some people are in a significant way. What do you guys think? So, they're finding readers. Are they going to find any validity or acceptance along the way?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if book publishers keep attempting to merge, making it harder to get published, like people will use the avenues available to them. Mm-hmm. And if self-publishing is as equal to one of the biggest publishing houses, why wouldn't people at least try?
Yeah. Well, I'm probably biased because I've been around long enough to remember when, self-publishing was very disdained, and for a reason. You couldn't have a bunch of books published, offset printing, and then you'd have 5,000 books in your garage and no way really to sell them. But of course, digital books have changed everything. Mm-hmm. My standpoint, if traditional publishing, great if you can get it, but I'm always happy when authors have more avenues towards success. And
Mhm.
this has become a very valid one. I know a lot of people who are making a lot of money this way. All right, second news story, and this was suggested by Renee, has to do with Colleen Hoover, who is currently the best-selling novelist in the United States by such a huge margin that it's hard to even compare. She has in this past year sold more books than James Patterson and Stephen King combined. I mean, it's just incredible. No metaphor I can come up with gives you a real sense of the size and loyalty of the audience that she has developed, which of course is in large part derived from huge success on TikTok or Book Talk. She now holds 6 of the top 10 spots on the New York Times paperback fiction bestseller list. And some of these are not books. Some are not new books. I mean, some of them go back years. This is a stunning number of simultaneous bestsellers from a single author who has sold over 8.6 million print books this year alone, more copies than the Bible, according to NPD BookScan. Renee,
Wow.
yeah, no. Why do people always compare anything with the Bible? Why is
Yeah,
that the
I don't.
touchstone?
That's the pinnacle, I guess.
How
I
many
guess
people
'cause-
need extra copies of the Bible? Like, is it actually that big of a bestseller?
Right. We pass it down in families, right? Like,
Yeah, I guess it's a consistent seller. Anyway,
Yeah.
Renee, you suggested this story. Why? What do you think is the significance here?
well, probably the significance for me is not the significance for the business minded. I will say that as you know, I've have 25 books or so, and I can tell you that my readers are getting younger due to Instagram and TikTok. So
Mhm.
it's been fun to see young readers. I'm getting, direct messages, not emails, from 20 somethings who have found my book through those kinds of means. But the thing that drew me to this story actually was reading. I read this, through my New York Times subscription, and I remember I was just in bed reading about her journey of how, like, she writes what
Mhm.
she wants to write. She has
Yeah.
passions and she has stories, and she sits down and writes them. And a lot of times, you'll hear things like, well, you have to stick to a genre. You'll hear that from probably your agent, maybe your publisher. I think Colleen has blown the doors off that. Readers are loving books with passion that they can author loves to write. And we, you know, talk to authors who write what they want to write. I think if you've got a good story, it's going to sell. Readers are going to find it. So it was
Mhm.
encouraging to me to, some of these really, really best-selling authors stick to a genre forever. It's they're in one genre and they're on that train forever.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that, Bill. I mean, you've made a great career doing that, and I think there's wisdom in that, because you find your readers. But for authors like Colleen and me, who do everything from suspense to silly comedy, this is an encouraging story.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's what traditional publishing will want. If you have a hit in one field, they're going to want more of that. And, they're not going to want you to branch out. They want more of what works until
Mhm.
finally your audience is sick of it, and then they'll dump you and get somebody else.
Right.
I read the same story you did in the New York Times, but what I took away from it was it talked about when she was writing her first novel, which, by the way, she self-published. She was living in a trailer house with her husband and young son, barely able to pay the bills. And now, a few years later, she's got 8.6 million print books. Print books. That's not even counting the
Mind
ebooks.
blowing.
That's 8.6 million print books. Writers, persistence pays off. Persistence, write what you love, stick with it.
She's the jewel of authors.
Well, that's a pretty good comparison, Jesse.
Yeah, right?
I don't know if everybody will remember Jewel.
Oh,
Certainly they
you
will.
mean a singer?
Yeah.
I thought you were thinking like a diamond or
Yeah, no, I mean it
took
works
me a
both
minute.
ways, but yeah, I mean the doing what you love, even if you're living in a trailer or in your car, and
Right.
sticking with it, like, I mean, 99% of the time it probably doesn't work, but the times it does, those are incredible stories, and that's a lot of ebooks she's selling on top of her.
Oh my gosh, it's mind blowing, and it tells you the power of social media.
Right.
How many people are on social media, and when something takes off on social media, it's crazy. So,
All right, let's move on to our interview. Katie Sise is a best-selling author of 6 novels so far. Her books have been included on best of lists by Good Morning America and the New York Post, Parade Magazine. But her current novel, The Break, is a Zibby's book club pick for November. She is a former TV host and jewelry designer. She lives outside New York City with her husband, 4 children, and a golden retriever. Katie, welcome to the podcast. Katie Sise is the best-selling author of 6 novels, which have been included on best of and bestseller lists all over the place. She's been on the Good Morning America list, New York Post, Parade Magazine, and her current novel, the one hovering over my shoulder, is The Break. That's a Zibby's book club pick for November. She's a former TV host and jewelry designer, lives outside New York City with her husband, 4 children, and a golden retriever. And we want to talk about all that. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you guys.
All right. Traditional first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, I know you've got lots, but just one, what would it be?
I think to write every day. I mean, that's the one that I think it seems to me when I talk to writers who have sort of made it to the point where they've completed a novel or they're successfully in classes or they're published, sort of like whatever their standard is for being a successful writer, and they've made those goals, it's because they touch the computer every day. And someone recently said to me, if you touch your project every day, it'll just build up a muscle and becomes a habit. I usually try for about 500 words a day. I tell myself, okay, just get 500 words out. And then sometimes when that starts to feel good, you can push towards 1,000 or 1,500. But even just to tell yourself that every day I'm going to write 500 words, because as you all know, you can write a book that way. Books
Right.
are generally between, let's say most books are between 65 and 80,000 words, most of the novels that you'll read. And there's certainly longer ones as well, of course. But you can imagine that writing 500 to 1,000 words a day, you can get a novel done pretty quickly that way.
I'm totally in agreement. Even on occasionally there's a day when I can see I'm not going to be able to write a chapter or even, like you were saying, 500 words. If I just open it up and look at it and remind myself what's going on, type a few words maybe, I think it makes a big difference.
I think so too.
Well, congratulations on your new book, The Break. This book has, to put it mildly, an unusual premise. Where did the idea for this come from?
So this was the first time this had ever happened to me, but it actually came to me in a dream. And I've heard other writers say that. And I thought, what must that be like? But one morning a couple years ago, I was just sort of like that cusp of waking up when you kind of remember all your dreams. And I dreamt of a woman. I saw her with white blonde hair and her back was turned to me. I didn't see her face, but I saw her clawing. She was in a very elegant room with wallpaper. There was a piano and she was clawing at the walls and screaming for someone to give her back her baby. And so when I woke up, I felt really shaken, and it was like just one of those dreams that's, really unsettling, and she stuck with me. So I kind of thought, I just kept thinking about her. Like it was like as though she was already a character in my mind. She was kind of rattling around in my thoughts for a long time. And I even made a little document on my computer that said, that dream I had, or like that book I dreamt of, like I was already thinking like, oh, she could be, I felt like I understood her enough to write her. And I felt like what she wanted and needed, even though I didn't know her story, I felt like I understood that she wanted her baby back. And so I felt like that was something I could write towards and write to understand. And there was times when I thought that the book would be too dark for me to write. I'm sort of like a scaredy cat who writes thrillers. So I circled around it. I thought, okay, I don't know if I can do this, but I kept thinking of her. And I thought, all right, well, I better try to start to write her. And so I did. And it felt like she felt like a mystery writer to me, which I've also never done before. I don't think I've ever had a character who was a writer. But it was really enjoyable to write her as a writer because so much of who she is, this like overactive imagination, she's trying to figure out what's real, what's not real, who can she trust? Why does she have this feeling of dread? And she kind of has to she almost starts to use some of her mystery writing skills and her personality to figure out the situation that she's in and the situation her family's in.
Sure. Why don't you just give us the quick 30-second plot summary, just so people know what we're talking about here?
Okay, so The Break is about a young woman named Rowan. She's 34 and she goes to deliver her baby in a New York City hospital. And she has a traumatic birth and she can't remember much of the birth, just little bits and pieces. But she returns home with her beautiful newborn Lila and she feels like something is terribly wrong. And her husband hires a beautiful young babysitter named June to help her sort of in this time of need. And one day Rowan looks down and she's absolutely sure that June has harmed the baby. And she starts to scream at June and asks for her baby back and accuses her of harming the baby when June has not. So June, of course, leaves very distraught, and the neighbors hear all of this. And a few days later, June disappears and Rowan becomes a suspect, among other things. And she has to put her mind back together and face some really dark truths to get to the bottom of what happened to June, her babysitter.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I loved it. I love that you admitted you're a scaredy cat that writes thrillers. That's so fun. I wonder how many there are out there who feel that way too. But so as you're researching this, what did you come across some surprises in your research? Like, what was some of the unexpected things that you came across?
Well, one of the most unexpected things is I was talking to an OBGYN and I was concerned that something that I was writing was just so far out there. And so without giving any spoilers away, there's something that happens in the book that I thought, I'm just not sure that this would happen or that this would happen to a mom. This would be her experience. And the OB told me that this would be mild compared to what they see women experience postpartum. Wow. In terms of things, psychologically, the things that can happen and go awry. And so that made me realize, okay, this is something that I want to talk about. And this is something that I really want to go there. And so my research was mostly, I had several physicians read the book, probably like 4 or 5, and then a postpartum doula, just to sort of make sure that I was dealing with the harder topics in the book. And, I just wanted to do them justice and deal with them sensitively. And I'm a mom of 4, so I have so many really wonderful friends of mine who've given birth and are really open, and all of us, we talk all the time about our birth experiences and our postpartum experiences. And, I'm grateful for those conversations because I feel like mostly I'm grateful for them because it's nice to have friends who are open about these things. And I think the conversation is becoming a lot more open. So I kind of wanted to hopefully contribute to that in a meaningful way and do it well. I mean, you always want to do these things well. But this was important to me to kind of get this right.
Right.
Fabulous. So I have a follow-up question to that real quick, because I think that's really interesting. You were talking about so did you lay down the plot as you wanted it and then sort of went into the research of, making sure this is right, that's right? Or did you research all the way up front and then put your plot together? Or was it a mixture?
That's a good question. It was definitely a mixture. So I don't outline. I really respect writers who are disciplined enough that they have that outline to work off. And sometimes I'm jealous of that. But for me, need to not know what's happening. And I need to go into it without knowing. I might write towards a twist. I'll often have a twist in my mind that I want to happen. And I can write towards that, but I like to not know. I never know who the killer is. I did not think the person who ended up doing it in this book, I absolutely did not think it was this person for the longest time. And then maybe about 5, 6 of the way through, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the person. Mostly because there was another person I thought it was, but I couldn't get him and this other character to get together romantically. I kept thinking they would. I kept putting them in scene together. I kept thinking that's what they were going to do, and then they wouldn't. And I was like, okay, guys, I'm going to have to figure something else out. And so I ended up really actually liking the motivation, rather than have it be something romantic. I liked that I needed to give them a different reason to do what they eventually do, which made me work harder, which is good. But I have no idea. I will have a sense of where things should go next. I often have a sense of location. I'll feel like, okay, they've been in this apartment for 2 scenes now, and I've got to get them out of there. And let's put them all, in this room. And Playwrights Horizons is in the book, like a theater. Let's put them there, and then let's put them at a bar or something. You'll have an idea where to go next. But then I often just put them all into scene and see what they do, because then it feels like watching a movie, and then I can't wait to see what happens. And I think that keeps me writing, keeps me going. To figure out who did what.
Well, you're making this book sound terrific, so good on you. That's
Good.
always helpful. This is not your first book, though, and as I think I already alluded in the introduction, you've got previous careers on television,
Mhm.
and your jewelry designs that put you on television. They're being worn by a lot of famous people. How did you get started as a writer?
So, well, I always loved to write. So even when I was a little girl, I would hole up in my bedroom and, write
Mhm.
stories and all the time. And I guess I sort of always thought it was this thing that I would either maybe come back to. I'm not really sure why it wasn't the thing I went for right out of college. I was a acting major in college, and so I did some plays and some, movies, but I had, about $1 to my name, and I kind of was like, okay, I have to figure out a way to make money. So I was bartending and waitressing and acting and always writing, but like always writing. Woke up and wrote first thing always. And then maybe would go to an audition and then would go bartend. And then at one point I was I'm not a huge night owl. And I was like, I've got to figure out a job that happens in the day. Like, and so I took a job at a little boutique, and I started, I was 24, 25. So I had like a lot of bravery, and I kind of was like, oh, I could make jewelry like this. I'll just make something like this. And then I had a piece on that. So I was making like, $10 an hour as a sales girl. But I had like, I was wearing a piece, and a customer said, oh, I love that. And I was like, oh, well, it's for sale, which is the wrong thing to do. And if anyone is listening, don't do that. But the woman who owns the boutique is still one of my really good friends. She just kind of like let it go. And then she was like, okay, we're going to make you a little shelf, and you can sell your pieces there. We're going to give you this little shelf. And then it's funny because that was what I did for years and years. I made jewelry. I talked about style and style segments and things like that. And I hosted I did this show on the Home Shopping Network for years, and it was so much fun. I loved every second of it. I loved being, it was a lot of fun. And then I kind of thought, okay, well, there should be a book about this, right? Because creative careers are so circuitous, and there's not always a straight path, and there's a lot of detours, and there's a lot of figuring out what you really want to do. And so I wrote a proposal for a book called Creative Girl. And that was helpful because it led me to my agent. And he's so wonderful. And he's been my agent for 13 years, and he's just always supporting me and, like steering me in the right direction. And so that was really helpful because that book led me to him. And then I remember saying to him, but I really want to write fiction. And he's like, okay, great. When I take a writer on, I take them on for their nonfiction, their fiction, their whole career. So I wrote a novel. It did not sell. I wrote like it was a paranormal romance. I actually really love it. And I love that book. I always think about, I've rewritten it like 1,000 times since 2008. They're like, we're barely even cell phones in the book. I'm like, I guess I should put cell phones in. But so it was just so long ago. And that one did, but it didn't sell. And I remember I was just devastated. But I'm like pretty stubborn when it comes to that kind of stuff. I kind of took a few days. I actually cried. I remember I cried myself to sleep for the first time in like a decade because, I was married. There wasn't like that much wasn't like I'd gotten my heart broken recently, but I remember being heartbroken over that book not selling. And then a few days later, I was like, okay, well, I've got to figure this out. So I started to write other projects. And then I submitted a sample to almost like audition for this, not audition, that's not the right way to say it, but I got a ghostwriting job. So I wrote 3 novels under someone else's name, which is like, as something that sometimes happens in the business. If the writer's been either signed up for too many projects or they're, maybe they have something going on in their personal life that they can't do the contract. So I wrote 3 novels, which was really helpful because I kind of learned the art of story and plotting. And they were really, it was a really good experience writing suspense. And then I felt like I was really ready to write my own because at that point I'd written, let's say 4 full novels, even though none of them had been published under my name. But then I thought, okay, I'm ready for this. And so I wrote a proposal. There was a woman in my agent's agency, another agent, and she said, let's write a book she's like, you should write a book called The Boyfriend App. And it should be about a girl who can get any boyfriend that she wants with an app. And she said, go ahead. She gave me all this freedom. She was like, go ahead and just write that book and take it where you want. And let's try to sell it. And we did sell it. We sent it to Alessandra Balzer, who's like a wonderful, wonderful editor at HarperCollins. And she bought that book. And so I did 3 books for Alessandra, 3 books for HarperCollins. And then, so at that point I was in my mid 30s when I was done doing those 3. And I really wanted to write adult. I really wanted to try writing adult suspense. And so I wrote We Were Mothers, which is the first of the 3 suspense novels that I did for Amazon Little A. And I really love doing those as well. I mean, I love both genres, but I feel more like an adult. So I think it made sense to kind of go towards adult as of now. I'd love to go back to YA at some point. But
You raise an
lot of
issue, which you'd probably just as well I didn't bring up, but too late.
Go ahead. I love
But
Yes,
this,
fine.
this, being a thriller, I might expect this to come from Thomas and Mercer, but it's not. It's coming from Little A. Does that
Mhm,
reflect
mhm.
some kind of dual genre purposing here, or what?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. So it's so funny. I connected with Carmen Johnson is my editor, and I just really adore her and respect her. And what I like about Little A and what I like about Carmen is that it has a lot of their literary fiction. So I always feel like I better do a good job with the writing, or they're going to be like, well, how did this girl sneak in here? So I know that I think, like you said, Thomas and Mercer, so much of their suspense is there. There's also Lake Union, which does really wonderful, readable, pretty delicious, like books that you want to be reading, book club fiction and women's fiction. And I think that Little A is known for, I don't know, I guess all kinds of wonderful fiction books. So I feel like, well, I better try to keep up here. It's like when you're playing with the more skillful players, you're like, well, I better make sure these sentences are singing or else someone's going to catch on to me. So I really enjoy working with them. I love my editor. She's really smart. I really respect her when she tells me something. I tend to agree with it. And if I don't agree with it at first, I give myself like a day. And generally by the next day, I'm like, oh, she's right. So
that's a great point, Katie. A lot of people fear the editor, right? Like when they're first starting, they think, oh my gosh, they're just going to rip my book apart and it's going to be a terrible experience.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, you get a good editor. It's the best experience ever.
The best experience.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so tell us. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, it's a fine line, right? Because on one hand, I feel from her that I can tell that she trusts me. Like once I called her in the middle of writing this book with a question and she was like, I think you know the answer to this. She's like, your readers. And I felt so emboldened because I'm like, okay, I have her. She trusts, my instincts on this book. But then I find that whenever, in general, I think collaboration makes books so much stronger. So I do welcome the feedback, even bad reviews I'm okay with because I'm kind of like, well, there's probably, even if I don't totally agree with it, there's probably something I can pull out and learn from it.
That's awesome. Well, so tell us a little bit about, like you told us you're a pantser, which Bill and I love to talk about endlessly, but we won't make you talk about it endlessly, but I'm also a pantser, so I love that.
I love talking,
what does a pantser's typical writing day look like? You're not making spreadsheets and outlines and checking off boxes and such. What does walk us through your day as a writer?
So, well, I think because of my stage in life, I have 4 kids under 11. My day in life, my writer life, I would say, is only about an hour of my day, but an hour or two. So mostly, we all wake up in the morning. I get everybody ready for school, and then I will generally write for about. My little ones are still in pre-K, so they're not there. They're not in school for that long. So I'll generally try to do 1 to 2 hours of writing. And that'll kind of do it. I hope to stretch that out. Like when my littlest go to kindergarten, I hope to maybe take on some more writing projects and try to like build that muscle back up. Because I remember before kids, especially when I was doing those ghostwriting projects, I could write for a good 6 hours a day. And I'd love to get that muscle back. Right now, I don't still have that. I definitely, at about 2 hours, I'm like, oh God, I need a snack, and then I'm done. So yeah. What about you guys? How many hours do you guys write for a day?
It depends, but I don't really want the 6-hour muscle back. That's a lot of writing. And
long. Yeah.
I could do 6 hours in my 20s, but I can't do it now.
or if the deadline is tomorrow.
Yeah, I can fill a day, but not with writing. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Well, so am I right? You've done 6 books now, or is it 6 books plus the ghostwritten ones?
Plus the nonfiction. Yeah. Yep. So I guess 7. This would be the 7th book total, 6 novels.
Okay. So what are some of the things you've learned along the way in terms of writing?
In terms of writing.
I don't want to be offensive, but you probably didn't know everything when you started. What have you learned since then?
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think one of the things I've learned is that I find that a class and a group is really helpful. And even now, sometimes I have to make like a makeshift group. And I will go to different readers at different points. And then I always try to return the favor. A lot of my readers are not writers. So, I have to be extra helpful with like kid pickups and, I don't know, maybe picking up the cake for someone's birthday party. I mean, I have to figure out other ways to, but a lot of my friends will read and it's really helpful. So I think getting feedback is super helpful as a writer, because sometimes you just don't know when you've written something that's a little too confusing, or you're making somebody so unlikable that your readers don't want to read about them. And okay, what else have I learned in terms of writing? Oh man, I think it helps to read everything in different genres, your own genre. I think I consider that to be sort of part of my job, is to really be reading and really see what works and what doesn't work in story. And I pay attention to when I'm watching TV, because I always feel like there's such a good beginning, middle, and end when you watch a show. But I think the biggest thing by far is just practicing it and not thinking of it as, I think sometimes, you certainly wouldn't start the piano and expect to be fantastic in a year, but you would expect to practice and expect to work so hard at it. And I think writing is the same. I mean, I don't think there's some magical writing gene that, that you have to just start off writing these pristine sentences. I think it all comes with time and with work. When people talk about the 10,000 hours, I just think I really think it's all about practice, because I can tell, even looking back, that the stuff that I wrote that didn't get published, really, things have gotten better since then. Each book I think tends to get a little better. Whether it's in terms of writing and story, or both, or characters. But I would say practice is honestly the biggest thing I've learned. And now that I've seen it from the other side, I'm like, oh, right, this is worth putting in the time, because it's important.
Well, that's one thing I think we all love about writing, is that you grow with each book. You never make it, So,
right. And it's kind of
and that's
exciting,
what
because
I
then
like
you think
about
like,
it.
well, what
Yeah.
if I pick something really good? Yeah.
So, okay. So what, or if you can tell us, what are you going to tackle next? What's your next project?
So I have 2 books under contract with Amazon Little A, and the next one is called The Vacation Rental, and it's going to be about a woman who rents out her home with some very unexpected results. And I sort of was thinking about it during the pandemic, because I had friends who were, renting out their country homes to families that would want to come up, maybe an escape from the city. And I just sort of thought, oh my God, strangers in your home,
Right.
that you've arranged to be there, which of course is wonderful and lovely. And I get it. But also I thought that's really ripe writing ground. I mean, somebody else in your home lying in your bed is really, truly a story, if I've ever heard one. So I thought that would be a fun thing to write. So that's what I'm working on next. And then there's one more to come after that. And it's always, I know some writers don't like to write under contract, but I love having a contract. I feel so grateful to know that I'm employed for the next 2 years or so. I mean, that's a really good feeling. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, I have one last question. What are you planning for Thanksgiving?
Oh man, I'm so excited. I often will host. I'm a terrible, terrible cook. Otherwise I would invite you, but the food is never really, it's not my strength. I mean, I'm not terrible. I'm mediocre, which is almost worse than being terrible. It's just medium. But I am a very relaxed host. It's edible. I make up for it by being I'm pretty relaxed. I love when everyone's over. So this Thanksgiving, we're going to go to my brother's. He lives in Southport, and he has 3 beautiful children. And I love my sister-in-law, and she's a huge reader. So we always talk about books. And then my sister is coming in from Boston, and my parents will be there too. So it's going to be great. It'll be great.
It sounds good.
And the food will be good. She's a good cook.
Well, congratulations again on the new book. And thanks so much for being on the podcast. Really glad you could be here.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice to be here. Thanks you guys so much.
Hey, if you haven't joined the WriterCon Facebook group yet, do it now. Do it today. You can Google for it or what is it? Not on Facebook. You wouldn't be Googling. You'd be searching for it. Or there's a link in the show notes you can follow. Join this wonderful community of writers and find out what's going on between podcasts. And speaking of, if you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, then rate or review it wherever you get podcasts. It does make it easier for new listeners, new writers like you to discover us. All right? Until next time, keep writing. And remember, like Colleen Hoover, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.